I have all the parts for the right nacelle laid out. Now there is a lot going on. Let's take a few moments and break down all the symbols for the nacelle. At first glance, you're going to notice some things that are a little bit different about the etching. First of all, you're going to notice that we've got a whole lot of scores on these three pieces. Now we've seen those on some of the Mighty Minis. This is the first time that I've been able to incorporate these on a larger aircraft. They're going to be really helpful for getting the shape of the nacelle. The F18 Super Hornet nacelle has got a very odd shape. It's got a really weird twist to it, which makes it a little bit difficult. These scores will make the assembly much easier. You'll notice up here on the R1 that we've got a new symbol, and we're going to go into that a little bit later. I'll show you how that one works. Over here we've got a triple arrow. The formers are pretty straightforward. You can see that we're just going to simply be stacking them. This is symbol mapping 101. This first former, you'll see that the two get stacked one direction. This one's got the M, so we're going to flip it around, glue those together. As we look over these skins, you're going to see we've got a doubler here. We've got a couple doublers up here, and there's one here in the back. Let's begin the nacelle building process by stacking and gluing the formers together. Once we're done with that, we're going to work on the R2 skin. If you look at our R2 skin, we're going to find a star. Anytime you see a star, that's the part that we're going to be starting with. The circle tells us that we're going to be bringing the two edges together and gluing them. And we're of course familiar with our remove paper symbol. Let's go ahead and start by removing all of the paper from this side of the R2 skin. Once we've got all the paper removed, we're going to roll the skin up, and I'm going to show you what these two new symbols represent. Real quickly, before we fold up our skin, I want to point out that our R2 skin is going to be going around our RN1 former here on this side, and on the back side, the R2 skin is going to be going around the RN2 former. Now you'll notice that the shape of the former, we've got a slight bit of roundness right here, and just a slight bit of roundness here. Over on the other side, we have roundness, and here it's got just a little bit. So we're going to add just a little bit of shape to these two panels. The top and the bottom are relatively flat, so we're not going to add any shape except to these two larger panels. You can see I barely added any shape. All right, now that we've added a little bit of shape, what we're going to do is we're simply going to fold this up right along those scores. And I'm going to do the same here. We have more of a squared off corner here at the side with the RN1. Here at the back with the RN2 side, you can see that it's a little more rounded. Once we've got that, we're going to bring our two edges together. And I want to talk about these new symbols. These symbols are very similar to our A-fold, B-fold symbols. Taking a look at our symbol, you'll see that it is made up of a long rectangle and a short rectangle. This edge is represented by the long rectangle, and you can see that it's going to sit on top of the short rectangle. If we look at the other side, this edge is being represented by the long rectangle, and you can see that it sits underneath the short rectangle. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring this edge over, and it's going to fit just like this. Now that we've done our test fit, I'm going to run a bead of glue right along top. And I'm going to bring my two edges together based on the symbol mapping instructions, and we're going to hold this in place until the glue cools. Once that's had a chance to cool down, we're going to test fit our RN1 former. I'm going to start here at the top. I want to make sure that this corner matches up with the inside corner. Once that's lined up, I'm going to start fitting my skin around the former. When our former is glued in place, there's going to be one layer of foam sticking out. You'll see that my former is a little bit loose all the way around. That's good. I would rather have a former that fits a little bit loose than a little bit too tight. Having a former that's a little bit loose will ensure that the edges of the skins will line up to one another and you won't have any noticeable steps. Now that we've got our test fit, we're going to glue the former in place. One thing I do want to point out, you're going to notice a little bit of a gap right here. Whenever I press in, there's going to be a little deformation on the outside of the skin right here. When I remove the former, I'm going to show you the inside of this skin. You're going to see a series of scores. These relief cuts will help the foam pucker in the correct places. When gluing the former in place, I'm going to begin by running a heavy bead of glue right along the top. I'm going to reinsert my former, make sure that corner is pushed all the way up to the inside corner, and I'm going to position my former, making sure that one layer of foam is sticking out evenly all the way around. Once that's had a chance to cool, I'm going to make my way around the edge of the former. When gluing the former in place, I'm going to begin on this outside edge opposite this step right here. From here all the way around to here is going to be hidden inside of the aircraft. I'm more concerned about getting this side looking good than this side. I'm going to run a little bit of glue right inside that gap, and gently squeeze it closed, and I'm going to wipe away the excess using a piece of scrap. I'm going to let that glue cool and then continue to make my way around. Now that our RN1 former has been glued in place, let's go ahead and do the RN2 former. Do a quick test fit. Just like with the first former, we want to make sure that one layer of foam is sticking up all the way around. I'm going to pull it out, and I'm going to run a bead of glue right along the top. You'll notice here, as the skin is making the corner, that it's compressing the skin just a little bit right here. Whenever I glue the next section, I'm actually going to slide the skin upwards just a little bit. You can see it creates a little bit of a gap right there at the corner. Doing this will give you a much better seam there at the corner when you go to add the next skin. We'll hold that in place while the glue cools, then continue to make our way all the way around. Once that's had a chance to cool down, let's take a look at the skin labeled R3. You can see here that we're just going to be tearing the paper away, and we're going to be attaching it using the glue and wrap method. RN3 is going to be attaching to the former RN2. We can see that we've got a doubler here. Let's go ahead and tear the paper away, add the doubler, and then we're going to start adding some shape. If you look close, you're going to see we've got a remove foam symbol. There's a little sliver we need to remove. All right, once that's been done, we're going to add our doubler. You're going to see a reference mark here, 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 and here. This block is going to drop right inside those reference marks. I'm going to add glue to the outside of the dashed area. Drop my doubler in and hold that in place for a few seconds while the glue cools. Once that's done, we're going to fold it up along the scores, and we're going to begin testing it to our R-N2 former. Now that our doubler's in place, let's start folding the skin along the scores. All right, once that's been done, let's grab our assembly and we're going to do a test fit. This is going to be the first instance where we use our triple arrow. Our triple arrow tells us that we're going to be beginning the glue and wrap process in a specified location. You'll notice that we've got a reference mark right here on the R2 skin. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be lining up this corner to that reference mark. That's going to become our starting point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick test fit, and I'm going to run a bead of glue from the reference mark all the way up here to the top. When bringing the two parts together, the side that does not have glue will shingle over the part that does have glue. I'm going to hold this in place for a full 2.5 to 3 minutes. I want to make sure that this does not move. If you've got a piece of tape, you can run a piece of tape across the seam to help hold it in place. Before we go any further, I want to point something out. If you remember, we removed a little sliver of foam. The edge of this is 90 degrees. If you look at the back of this skin, these three scores tell us that this side is very round. So we go from round here at the back to a 90 degree up here. The reason that I removed a little sliver of foam is whenever we fold this skin over, we're going to be pushing the skin this way just slightly so it creates a 90 degree bend. Okay, our fit looks good. I'm going to run a really heavy bead of glue right along the top of that former. Going to push that skin over to give me that 90 degrees, and I'm going to hold this in place. The side that does not have glue will be shingling over the side that does have glue. Get a little piece of scrap. I'm going to push that down and hold it in place. Make sure and hold this for a full 2.5 minutes. Once that's had a chance to cool down, using the glue and wrap, we're going to continue to make our way around. Make sure my corners line up good. Just made a little bit of a mess. If you end up with a gap right here, don't worry about it. This is all going to be hidden on the inside of the aircraft. Once that's cooled down, you can run a bead of glue down one of these two edges, and we're going to bring these two edges together. Again, if you've got a little bit of a gap, no big deal. It's all going to be hidden. Once that's had a chance to cool down, we're going to work on this shape just a little bit. We want to make sure it's pretty much symmetrical. You can see that it's a little taller on this side than it is on this side. Just get it close. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right, once that's done, we're going to set the assembly off to the side and turn our attention to the horizontal stabilizer. To build the horizontal stabilizer, let's first take a look at the symbol mapping. You can see here, here, and here, we're going to be removing foam. Right along this score, we're going to be putting a bevel on both sides. This is the actual elevator, and you'll notice that I did not put the bevel start and bevel stop symbols. The reason I didn't do that is in the future, we might be offering a full flying tail assembly. In that case, you will not be adding a bevel. Let's begin by removing the foam wherever indicated. Using the backside of a razor blade, I'm going to go down each of the scores. Once that's done, I'm going to peel away the foam. Once the foam's been removed, using the backside of a razor blade, I'm going to go right down this score. I'm going to fold it back on itself and cut my first bevel. I'll flip it over and do the same on the other side. Next, I'll open it back up and lay it flat. The servo I'm going to be using is the Flite 17-gram servo. You'll notice that I've got the single arm screwed in place, and I'm going to drop it right here. Before gluing it, I'm going to scratch the back side. This will make sure it stays in place whenever we add glue. Let's let that cool for about a minute and a half before moving on. Next, we're going to glue the servo wire in place. What I'm going to do is just run a very light bead of glue right down the center of these two bevels. Next, you're going to want to locate two of the wooden horizontal stabilizer spars. We're going to glue them together using CA. If you don't have CA, you can always use wood glue. It does take a little while to dry. I hit it with a little activator. And I'll bring the two halves together. Once that's done, we're going to drop the wooden spar right here beside the servo. Test fit looks good. I'm going to run a bead of glue where the paper meets the foam on that side and on this side. And we'll drop that straight in and let it cool. Once that's had a chance to cool down, we're going to do a test fold. I'm going to fold this over on itself. And I want to make sure that it folds over square to itself. I'm going to flip the assembly around, and what I'm going to do is I want to make sure this edge is going right along this score. All right, that looks really good. Next, I'm going to run a bead of glue between the two bevels. Put some glue here, and then I'm just going to apply glue all over this surface. Fold it over on itself again, checking to make sure everything is lined up correctly, and press firmly, hold for 2 minutes. Since we're doing a conventional elevator, I'm going to break this open and I'm going to put a bevel right along this edge. Once I've cut my bevel, I'm going to run a bead of glue and wipe away all the excess. I'm going to leave it in the open position while the glue is cooling down. Give that about 30 seconds or so before moving on. Once that's had a chance to cool down, using your razor blade, you can play connect the dots. Make sure you're just cutting through one layer of foam and not two layers. Next, we're going to test fit our horizontal stabilizer. Before we do a test fit with our horizontal stabilizer, I'm going to cut a hole right up front. This hole is where our servo wire will be passing through. Since we're doing a conventional elevator, I'm going to trim about 3/16 of an inch off of the elevator. You can see how my cut is paralleling this line right here. If we do a full flying tail, that edge will actually be left in place. To do our test fit, I'm first going to cut a very small bevel. I'll do one at the top, and I'm also going to do one on the bottom. Be careful not to cut your servo wire. Once I've cut my double bevel, I'm going to feed my wire through the hole we made earlier. I'll insert my horizontal stabilizer into this slot, and we're going to slide everything forward. And I want to make sure that the wood goes right inside. Now what we want to do is whenever you're looking at this from the back, you want to make sure that the horizontal stabilizer is coming straight out. So you may need to twist it this way or the other way just a little bit. Once we're happy with our test fit, I'm going to run a heavy bead of glue right down the middle here. Make sure that my wooden former is in place, and I'm going to slide everything all the way forward. I'm going to make sure it's coming straight out the nacelle. I'm going to hold it in place while that first bead of glue cools down. Once you're happy with the fit of the horizontal stabilizer, we're going to run a bead of glue down this side and a bead of glue down the other side. We'll hold that for a couple minutes while the glue cools, and then we're going to glue the wooden former to the skins. You'll notice I've got some gaps along the wood. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a bead of glue where the wood meets the skin, and then I'm going to take and push the skin over and pull it around to where it's tight. Once the glue's had a chance to cool, go ahead and grab your R4 skin and peel the paper away. Once that's done, we're going to add shape all the way around. If we look at our symbol mapping, you'll see that we have the single arrow. Anytime you see a single arrow, that means we're simply going to line up the seams and work our way around, starting right here. I'm going to do a quick test fit. I'm lining up my seams. We're starting right here. I'm going to put a short bead of glue, about 1 inch long. And I'm going to bring my two edges together. We'll let that cool for a couple minutes before moving on. Once that's had a chance to cool down, using the glue and wrap method, you're going to go all the way around and glue the skin in place. When I bring my two edges together, I've got a little bit of an overlap, so I'm simply going to cut a bevel. And now I can bring the edges together. I'm not worried about my seam being a little bit ugly. This is going to be hidden on the inside of the aircraft. You can repeat the exact same process on the next skin. On this last skin, I want to make sure that this hole is as close to perfectly round as possible. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press with my thumb. I'm going to open up a channel where the two sides come together. I'm going to run a bead of glue, and I'm going to put this on the tabletop and press down gently while the glue cools. This will give us the shape we're looking for. Next, you're going to want to add a long servo extension. Make sure your colors are lined up correctly, and be sure and tape where they come together. Once that's done, let's play connect the dots again on the RN1 former. Once the foam's been removed, we're going to test fit our EDF assembly. To install the EDF, I'm going to drop the entire assembly straight down. I want to make sure the thrust tube misses the elevator servo wires. You can see how I've got my EDF wires feeding through. And I'm going to drop everything down. Once it's down, about that far, we're going to take and rotate it, and we need to pull our wires through. Once our wires are through, I'm going to flip the assembly upside down, and I'm going to push straight down. Once the EDF is all the way in, I'm simply going to run a bead of glue where the plastic meets the former. We're going to give the glue a couple minutes to cool, then we're going to add our intake. To build our intake, let's take a couple moments and look at the symbol mapping. We see here, here, and here, we're going to be removing foam. We have a score right here and a bevel on either side. And we also are going to be removing paper from the surface. Let's go ahead and remove the paper now. Once we've removed all the paper using the backside of a razor blade, I'm going to go around the areas where we're going to be removing foam. And let's pull the foam out. Once that's done, using the backside of a razor blade, I'm going to go down the score, and I'm going to fold this door back all the way. I'm going to cut a small bevel, and I'll cut a small bevel on this side. Once that's done, I'm going to run a bead of glue right down the middle, and I'm going to wipe away all the excess. Once that cools down, we're going to bend the intake along the scores. Then we're going to add the doublers. Just like we've done elsewhere, we're going to bend the intake right along the scores. You'll notice that I'm holding my hand very flat, and I'm also using my wrist as I bend that over. I want to make sure I don't crinkle the foam. When installing the doubler, I want to make sure that I've got a gap between the back of the doubler and the edge of the foam, since this area right here is where the former will be. Next, we're going to create a stack for our servo. We'll give that just a minute to cool, then we're going to add a servo. To install the servo, I'm simply going to run the wire through. I'm going to push it straight in. Notice the orientation of the gear and the servo arm. You'll want to make sure that the servo arm is pointing in the direction of this notch. Once you've got your servo dropped in place, I'm going to put a little bit of glue in the front and in the back. We'll give that a minute to cool, then we're going to test fit our intake. Starting here at the top, we're going to line up these two corners, and we're going to run a bead of glue right along the top here. Make sure you give this a full 2.5 minutes to cool. I want to make sure that nothing shifts as we begin making our way around the rest of the former. As I make my way around, I'm only going to do just a little bit as I make this first corner. In order for my edges to come together, I'm needing to bend the intake towards the bottom of the aircraft there in the front. Once that's had plenty of time to cool, we're going to bead of glue about this long along the former. And we'll bring her two edges together. Before we finish gluing, I'm going to pull this wire out and put a piece of tape to keep it in place. You can see I've got it coming out right at the corner. Next, I'm going to run a bead of glue right along the former and hold everything in place while it cools. Once that's cooled down, I'm going to apply 3 pieces of tape. And I'm going to run a bead of glue along the top. Bring these edges together and wrap the tape around. I used a pretty heavy bead. I want to give myself plenty of time to work. I'll get one more piece of tape right here. Now, as that's cooling down, I'm going to roll the intake in the direction that the horizontal stabilizer is sticking out. One of the things that's very interesting about this Super Hornet is the way this intake twists from front to back. Once that's cooled down, using a razor blade, we're going to play connect the dots. Once that's been removed, we're going to make a small channel coming off of this little horseshoe shape. Once that's been done, we're going to install a push rod housing. To install the push rod housing, I'm going to feed the push rod through the pill-shaped slot there towards the rear of the aircraft and feed it forward. I'm going to catch the opening with the push rod and feed the push rod housing through. I'm going to run it about 1/4 inch past that U-shaped notch, put a little bit of glue, and drop it in place. Once the glue's cooled down, I'm going to trim the excess off the back. To trim the housing, I'm going to cut it just slightly using a razor blade and bend it 90 degrees. Once it's been cut off, I'm going to apply a bead of glue right here at the front, and we'll let that cool down. I made a little bit of a mistake earlier. I should have waited to put the servo arm on until I connected the servo arm to the push rod. It's okay, we'll just pull it off real quick, feed it through, reinstall, and tighten the screw down. Our right nacelle is now finished. You'll simply mirror the process on the left-hand one. Laid out in front of me are skins C1 through C11. These skins make up the fuselage of our F18. A couple things that I want to point out. If you look over here on this side, you'll notice that I've got my designation all along one side. You want to make sure whenever you're putting the fuselage together that those designations are always on one side. It's real easy to get one switched around. It might go together, but your fuselage shape will be adversely affected. So double check that all the markings are running down one side. If you look over here, I've already stacked and glued formers F1 through F4. Even though the assembly of the fuselage is pretty straightforward, I'm going to go over the assembly of skins C6 through C8. Before we get started, let's take a look at our markings. We'll see here on the skin labeled C8, we see a star. Anytime we see a star, that always tells us this is the part we're going to be starting with. We see that there's a circle. So once we peel the paper away, we're going to add shape and we're going to be gluing the two edges together to form a complete shape. Once that's done, we're actually going to jump up here to skin C6. Now you'll notice that we've also got a circle here, which again tells us that we're going to be bringing our edges together. Once we have C8 and C6 together, we're going to bridge the two using the part labeled C7. Now that we've got a game plan, I'm going to go ahead and remove paper from C8. If we look closely at our mapping, we'll see that this is going to go around former F4 here and F3 here. Let's take a quick look at the former to see where we need to add any additional shape. You can see here that the corners, we've added scores, so that's no problem. We know we're going to be adding some shape there. But as we bring the part around, we're probably going to need to add some shape down through here. We'll be doing that on both sides. Let's do that now. I'm also going to add just a little bit of shape here in the middle. Not very much, just a touch. That'll get it. Once that's been done, I'm going to run a bead of glue on one edge. And I'm going to shingle over the side that has glue with the side that does not have glue. The part that does not have glue will slightly shingle over the side that does have glue. You'll notice that all my excess glue shoots to the inside where it'll be hidden. You'll also notice that my shape doesn't really resemble the former. That's okay. Once we get the formers in place, it'll take shape just like we need. Once the glue's had a chance to cool, I'm going to install my F4 former. I'm going to line up my registration mark here in the center of my former to the registration mark here on top of the skin. There we go. You'll notice that the skin is a little bit loose. That's okay. I'd rather have the skin loose than too tight. I'm going to start here at the top. I'm going to run a bead of glue here in the middle at the top. Using a piece of scrap, I'll wipe away the excess. I'm going to hold that in place while the glue cools. Now I'm going to work my way around. Since I've got a gap, I'm going to just try to make that gap even all the way around. Once that's glued in place, we're going to install the F3 former. I'm going to line up the reference marks there at the top, and when I install the F3 former, I want to make sure that 2 layers of foam are sticking up above the skin. Test fit looks good. I'm going to pop that out, and I'm going to run a bead of glue all the way around. Once both formers have been glued in place, we can set this off to the side, and let's remove the paper from the skin labeled C6. Once we've got our paper removed, I'm going to check out the F2 former, and we see here at the top of the former that it's a little bit rounded, so we're going to add a little bit of shape right here. And as I roll it around, you can see here on this edge that it'll need a little bit of shape. So we'll add a little bit there as well. Now that we've got our shape added, I'm going to bend the skin over along the scores. Now notice that my hand is very flat And you'll also notice I'm not creating any crinkles through here. You'll want to make sure to be careful not to press too hard in the center. You can also use both hands. That'll help distribute the pressure even more. You can see here that I'm bending it over using my hand and my wrist as well. Now I'm going to bend along here. Again, I'm using my hand and my wrist to apply even pressure from one end of the skin to the other. All right, once I got my shape, I'm going to bring my two edges together. It's very important when you bring these edges together, you want to make sure that the corners are lined up. I'm going to go ahead and tear off 4 or 5 pieces of tape. Once I've got my tape ready, I'm going to run a bead of glue along one edge or the other. And I'm bringing my glue all the way up to the paper. I bring my two edges together. The side that does not have glue is going to shingle over the side that does. And just like before, that'll force all that excess glue to the inside where it'll be hidden. I'm going to run a piece of tape anywhere my seam looks good. You'll notice that the bottom is very flat. I want to make sure the two edges butt up squarely to one another. Give the glue a good 2.5 minutes to cool before adding your formers. Once the glue's had a chance to cool, we're going to install the F2 former. I can tell that because I've got this taper, I'm going to have to do some trimming. When trimming the F2 former, make sure and trim the former that does not have the notches. I'm primarily cutting away material here at the front to match this taper. Let's see how that does. Still feels a little bit tight, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to crush the edge of the former. Crushing doesn't work, you can always use a razor blade to remove material. All right, that fits in there nicely. Since that easily drops in, I'm going to run a bead of glue all the way around. And check for alignment here at the top. And check for alignment here at the bottom. And just like with the F3 former, we want to make sure that 2 layers of foam are sticking out. I'm going to hold this in place while the glue cools. Then we're going to install our F1 former. Once that's cooled down, we're going to install the F1 former. Line it up here at the bottom and push it in. While it goes in, I notice it is just a little bit snug. Just like I mentioned before, I'd rather have the former a little loose than a little tight. There we go, that drops in a lot easier now. Double checking my reference marks, and you'll see that I've only got 1 layer of foam sticking out. I've got a little bit of a gap, so using my hands, I'm spreading it out to where it's even all the way around the former. Now that both formers have been glued in place, we're going to bridge these 2 assemblies with C7. One thing to point out is this is the peak of the fuselage. So everything from here back angles slightly downward. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a small bevel here at the back of the former up on top. Once we've removed a little bit of material, go ahead and remove the paper from your C7 skin. Looking at my former here at the top, I notice it's a little bit rounded. It's also rounded here on the side, so I will add a little bit of extra shape. We're going to be attaching to the F2 former, so I'm going to double check I've got the right side. You'll notice that I'm lining up my reference marks there at the top. I'm going to run a bead of glue about 1.25 inches long. You'll see that I'm running it along that former and up against the back of the skin. I'm going to hold that in place till the glue cools. You can also run a piece of tape across the seam. Once the glue's had a chance to cool, we're going to use the glue and wrap method all the way out to the ends. Once that's cooled down, let's test fit our F3 former. If you look closely, I can get the fit really good right there in the center, but I'm having some issues as I go around the corner. So what we're going to do is we're only going to apply a bead of glue about 1 inch, 1.25 inches long, right across the center. I'm going to hold this for a full 2.5 minutes. I want to make sure that nothing shifts. So now that we've got the skin secured right here in the middle, you'll notice that you may have a little bit of a gap. It may be a little too tight, maybe a little too loose. You can adjust this until your seam is perfect. So my test fit looks really good. Now I need to get some glue up underneath the skin along that former. I'm going to run my glue gun along the former. Looks like I'm getting most of the glue on the skin, and that's okay. Any way you can get glue in there will work. Once that's done, do the same thing on the other side. Now that we've got our assembly done, let's go ahead and take a look at the accessory cover. For the accessory cover, we're going to first peel off the paper. And let's make a quick pull. I'm going to tear off about 4 inches of tape. I'm going to roll it once and a second time. Next, I'm going to fold it in half. Before you add your tape, go ahead and add a little bit of shape. Now that you've added some shape, let's install the pull. I'm going to push it through until it sticks up about 3/8 of an inch. Put some glue on one side, press it down. I'm going to run some glue on the other side and press it down. If you look here at the 4 corners of our accessory cover, you're going to see a circle with a hashtag. Anytime you see that, you know we're going to add some magnets. Using a barbecue skewer, I'm going to peel the foam away, add a little bit of glue, and I'm going to drop in a magnet. I'm going to add a second magnet, and I'm going to add an X up here on top. Now we're going to drop this corner magnet into the correct slot. So I'm making sure that my arrow is pointing forward. There we go. I'm going to put a drop of glue here in this slot, slide my magnet off, and the side with the X will go down into the glue. Go ahead and do the same thing on the remaining corners. Once you've got all your magnets glued in place, go ahead and attach your tabs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to center this between the 2 magnets, and you can see that half of it is on the accessory cover and half of it is hanging off. This one's already been glued in place, so you can see what that looks like. Give that a minute or 2 to cool, then we're going to do a test fit. Once your tabs are glued in place, let's go ahead and test fit our cover. That looks really good. Now that our assembly is complete, let's remove this square using a razor blade. Once that's done, you can assemble your battery box and you can slide it in from the front up towards the front. Once you've got your battery box installed, you're going to finish out the nose, all the pieces except C1. We'll cover the assembly and installation at a later time. Once you've installed skin C1 through C5 onto our assembly, we're going to work our way backwards and install skin C9A, C10A, and C11. Once you get these parts along with the formers installed, I will show you how to install this bottom plate. Before we finish out the fuselage, I want to point something out. You'll notice here that I've got a seam here at the bottom that didn't quite close up correctly. Now I want to get some glue in there, but I don't want to have glue smeared on the outside. So I want to show you a real easy trick to make sure that glue goes only where we want it. I've got two pieces of really low tack tape, and I'm going to run it right along one edge. Right, you can see that my seam is still exposed. I'm also going to run a piece of tape here on the other side. So between my two pieces of tape, I can still see that open gap. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to shoot that glue straight down into the gap. Because I've got the tape in place, I don't have to worry about being neat. Take a piece of scrap, force a little bit more in, and then I'm going to quickly remove the tape. You can see with the tape removed, the glue stays where it needs to stay. I'm simply going to reapply tape over the seam, let it cool, and the gap's closed up. Once you get skin C2 through C10 in place, we can go ahead and finish out the fuselage. You'll see here that we have four pieces. We've got a rectangular piece of wood, a rounded piece of wood, we've got the bottom plate, and then we have C1, which makes up the nose. Let's begin with a rectangular shaped piece of wood. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this here in this notch here at the back of the fuselage. You can see I've got a little bit of a gap. I'm going to push it forward, and I want to make sure visually that it's centered. So I've got my test fit. I'm going to put a bead of glue here in the notch, and I'm going to drop my wooden piece in place. We'll let that cool, then we're going to do the next one. When installing the rounded piece, we want to make sure that the rounded edge goes towards the nose of the aircraft. I'm simply going to slide it into the slot, visually ensure that it's centered, and I'm going to apply a bead of glue where the wood meets the foam on the inside. The slot that the wood passes through is slightly oversized. It doesn't matter where it is in this slot. Once the inside's been glued, you can apply a bead of glue on the outside, and we'll let that cool for a couple minutes. Taking a look at our plate, we see that we need to remove foam from this channel right here. Here we have a score. I'm going to go ahead and run down the score with the backside of a razor blade. Once that's been done, we're going to flip it over. I'm going to gently squeeze the battery box together. I'm going to push this plate all the way up until it makes contact with the former. Once that's been done, I'm going to push it down till the top is flush with the edge of the skin. I want to make sure that going back that this is lined up exactly with this former. May have to twist it just a little bit. All right, once that's in place, I'm going to run a bead of glue here and here. Make sure it's pushed down, and I'm going to hold it in place while the glue cools. If you get a little bit sloppy, it's okay. All of this will be hidden inside the aircraft. I'm also going to run a bead of glue anywhere where the skin meets this plate. I want to make sure that the channel is lined up with the vertical cuts on the fuselage. Again, I'm not going to worry about making it really neat since it's going to be hidden. Once that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to break this back on the score, and we're going to push the plate down. If it's a little tight, you can always come in and cut a little bit of a bevel. I'll do that just to show you. That fits a little better. I'm going to fold it back, add a bead of glue here on top of the former, run a bead of glue here on the side. And push the plate back in place. I'm going to hold this for a full 2.5 minutes until the glue's had a chance to take a set. Next, I'm going to put some glue here on top of this wooden spar and run a bead of glue right down this edge and this edge. Also put a bead of glue here. You can use your hands, but if you have some tape handy, you can also run a strip of tape across here to help hold the edges closed. If need be, you can do one edge at a time as well. To make the nose, let's take a look at the symbol mapping. We see that we're going to be creating a complete circle, which means we're going to be gluing two edges together prior to installation. We're going to be peeling the paper, and this is going to be an edge-to-edge fit. So the C1 skin will be fitting edge to edge to the C2 skin. Let's go ahead and peel the paper away. Anytime that I'm doing a nose, I always like to cut a bevel here and here. Whenever I bring my two edges together, this creates a channel that I can fill with glue. Let's go ahead and add some shape. We're going to take and we're going to roll this up. As I'm rolling it, I'm making sure not to crinkle the foam. And you can see that I'm rolling it tighter than it will be once the two edges are glued in place. This helps break down the foam. All right, once that's done, I'm going to cut a very wide bevel here at the nose. What I'm trying to do is make the foam very thin in this area. This will help it roll a little easier. And I'm going to roll it the other way now. Again, we're just trying to break down that foam. And the longer you leave it held like this, the easier it's going to be to bring the two edges together. You can wrap a piece of tape around this and let it stay this way for 15-20 minutes. It'll really help when it comes time to gluing the edges together. You can see that I've got one piece of tape on one of the two edges. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring these two paper edges together, and I'm going to fold my piece of tape across. Now at this point, we've got a teardrop shape. What we're going to do is I'm going to lay it on top of the table. I'm going to press it down, and you can see this channel. We're going to take and fill that channel with hot glue. I'm going to keep downward pressure on the nose while the glue cools. You'll probably need to let this cool for about 3 minutes. Once the glue's cooled down, if you look at your nose from the side, you're going to see foam poking out. We're going to take and we're going to remove that excess foam. Once that's done, we're going to ensure that the shape of the nose has a uniform round shape. Once we're happy with the shape of the nose, we're going to do the same thing on the next skin. Once we get the shape close, we're simply going to line up the two edges. All right, our test fit looks good. I'm going to run a bead of glue all the way around the edge. Got to wipe away my excess. Made a little bit of a mess on this one. You may have to gently squeeze one or both of the skins while the glue's cooling to ensure that they have a perfect fit. I noticed once I got the wood installed that it wasn't quite clocked correctly. If that happens, you can simply push down on the high side and apply a bead of glue at the top. Once you've applied glue, simply hold the high side down until the glue has a chance to fully cool. For this next step, make sure you have plenty of room. This plane is huge and takes up a lot of room. We're going to take the squared off spar and run it into the slot on the nacelle. If you look in the front, you'll notice that the rounded off spar rides on top of the nacelle. Let's check our fit. We're going to bring our two edges together. You'll notice that I've got my hand laying very flat. I'm going to be pressing against this former. Most of the pressure I'm going to be applying will be right in line with the spar. This is very important. My other hand is going to be right along the bottom side of the fuselage where we have a reinforcement plate. When I push the two sides together, I'm going to make sure I have a very tight fit between the fuselage and the nacelle. Only add glue where the seam comes together perfectly. We're going to start at the back and work our way forwards. Before adding glue, there's one thing I want to point out. It is imperative that the dotted lines on the nacelle line up to the slot on the fuselage. Once I've got everything lined up the way I want it, I'm going to add a quick bead of glue. Once I've added glue, I'm going to hold the two sides together for a full 2.5 minutes while the glue cools. Once that's cooled down, we're going to add a bead of glue from here all the way up to here. I want to make sure my gap is closed as much as possible. I'm going to shoot a quick bead of glue up underneath the wood as best I can. I'll gently press it closed and run a bead of glue between the two pieces. Once you've added glue, hold it in place until the glue's had a chance to cool. You'll notice that my hands are laying very flat against the surface of the nacelle. I want to make sure that I'm not creating any crinkles. With my fingertips, I'm gently pressing the bottom of the nacelle towards the center of the aircraft. This will help give us the correct shape. Once the glue's had a chance to cool, we're going to apply a bead of glue from here all the way up to this seam. You'll notice that my gap is a little bit bigger than before. We'll probably have to add several passes of glue to close it up. You won't have to worry about making a mess. All of this is hidden underneath the wing. If you have to apply multiple layers of glue, let the glue fully cool before adding another pass. Once that's cooled down, I'm going to run a bead of glue on the underside. I'll run it up as far as I can. As the glue's cooling, I'm going to press the bottom of the intake towards the center of the aircraft. Once the glue's had a chance to cool, you're now going to make the other nacelle. You can simply mirror this process on the other side. Once both nacelles have been put in place, we're going to install our wing spar. To install our wing spar, we're going to play connect the dots using a razor blade. Do this on both nacelles. Once that's done, I'm going to pass my wing spar through the slot. Once I get the wing spar through, I'm going to push it all the way down. I noticed here in the middle, I'm not able to push the spar all the way down. I'm going to have to go in and figure out what's causing interference. Once your spar is seated in place, use a ruler to center your spar exactly. Once it's centered, make sure it's pressed down evenly on both sides, and we'll take a look at it from the front. One thing I want to point out is this aircraft has anhedral, which is opposite of dihedral. On most aircraft, the wingtips are pointed slightly upwards. On this F-18, the wingtips are pointing slightly downwards. Make sure that your wing spar is level. You want to make sure you don't have one side higher than the other. Once we're happy with the position, we're going to add a bead of glue anywhere the spar meets the foam. We'll give that a couple minutes to cool, then we're going to add our lower wing skin. Next, we're going to test fit our lower wing skin. If you look really closely, you'll see a very small hole in this area of the nacelle. And if we look up front, you'll also see a very small hole near the nose of the aircraft. These are reference point for the front and back of the lower wing skin. What we're going to do is line up the back hole to the back edge of the lower wing skin. We're going to make contact with the spar and line up the front of the lower wing skin to the hole up front. Once we've located our reference marks, we're going to glue our lower wing skin in place, but we'll first need to add one bevel. I'm going to make a bevel along this area of the lower wing skin. You'll notice that the bevel is on the opposite side of the etching. You'll see that I messed it up just a little bit. That's okay. All of this will be hidden. The first thing I'm going to do is match up the trailing edge of my lower wing skin to the hole. I'm going to run a bead of glue from here to here. I'm going to hold this in place for a full 2.5 minutes. I want to make sure that nothing shifts. Now that I've got my lower wing skin tacked in place in the back, take a look at what I've done here on the wingtip. I've got it propped up using a couple rolls of tape. This will really help us as we continue to glue our lower wing skin in place. With the wingtip propped up and the back tacked in place, I'm going to line the front of my lower wing skin up with a hole and apply a short bead of glue. The wooden spar should be making contact with the lower wing skin. Once the glue up front has had a chance to cool, I'm going to gently press the lower wing skin up against the fuselage and run a bead of glue where the two come together. Gently press and hold. Make sure when applying pressure to the fuselage that you're pushing on a former. Once that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to press the lower wing skin upwards so it makes contact completely with the wing spar. Then I'm going to add a bead of glue where the wing spar meets the lower wing skin. We'll give that a couple minutes to cool down. Once that's fully cooled, go ahead and add glue anywhere the lower wing skin meets the nacelle. Before going any further, let's go ahead and add our servo. To install the servo, you're simply going to feed the wire from the bottom and push the servo in place. The gear head of the servo is closest to the trailing edge of the wing. Once the servo's in place, go ahead and apply a bead of glue all the way around. Once your glue's had a chance to cool down, go ahead and add your extension. Be sure you double check the colors and tape the connection once you're done. Once that's done, you can feed your extension underneath the push rod housing, and we're going to feed the extension through this slot here. If there's not a slot there, you can simply create one using a screwdriver or a barbecue skewer. And once that's done, using a barbecue skewer, we're going to remove foam from the areas indicated on the lower wing skin. Once that's done, using a barbecue skewer, we're going to remove foam from all the areas indicated with our symbol mapping from the lower wing skin. Once that's done, go ahead and add your wing spars. If you need help with that, check out the wing video located in this playlist. Once you've installed your wing spars, go ahead and add a bead of glue where the foam spar meets the fuselage. Locate the wing plate from your kit. The wing plate will go between your forward foam spar and your wooden spar. This plate is going to give our aircraft a whole lot of strength. It also gives us a very large surface area to apply glue to. This is very helpful when adding the upper wing skin. If the plate is too big, using a razor blade and a straight edge, you can simply cut it to size. Make sure the plate is flush with the top of both of the spars. You can also add a bead of glue anywhere the plate makes contact with the fuselage. Next, we're going to add a tapered strip. We're going to start it where the spar makes contact with the fuselage and work our way forward. To ensure it fits snugly, I'm going to flip it over and cut a bevel along the bottom. Once we've cut our bevel, I'm going to run a couple beads of glue, one where the lower wing skin and the fuselage meet, and one down the middle of the strip. You can also run a bead of glue where the strip meets the lower wing skin. Before installing the upper wing skin, go ahead and hook up and test all of the servos. Once we get our upper wing skin in place, we no longer have access to service the servos. To do the upper wing skin, let's begin by removing paper as indicated by the symbol mapping. We will be leaving the paper on the ailerons. Next, we need to add a bevel. Let's begin by using the back side of a razor blade and running down the score. We'll flip the aileron to the open position and cut our bevel. Once we've added our bevel, let's run a bead of glue down the hinge. Once we've added our bead of glue, go ahead and remove all the excess using a piece of scrap. Next, we're going to add bevels anywhere indicated. You'll notice that the angle of my bevel is a little more than 45 degrees. Once that's done, we're going to add some shape. I'm going to begin by adding some shape on this portion of the wing. You'll notice that I'm not going past this line right here. We're actually going to be adding shape in a different direction. Using my fingertips, I'm adding a little bit of extra shape right at the leading edge. Once that's done, I'm going to add some shape along the streak. You'll notice that it's a little bit harder to add shape. That's because we're going against the grain of the foam. Once we've got our shape added, let's do a quick test fit. Let's go ahead and test fit the upper wing skin to the airframe. When I do my test fit, there are 3 areas that I want to concentrate on. I want to make sure that a little bit of paper is overlapping this area right here. So I'm going to start by pushing that up against there. And as I rotate the airframe around, I want to make sure that this corner lines up with this corner as close as possible. And lastly, I want to make sure that the skin is pushed up against the fuselage. As I push down, we're going to be making contact with this strip right here. This is probably going to be the most difficult portion of the build. If you do have a friend or somebody with some extra hands, it does make it a little bit easier, but it can be done with one person, and I'm going to show you how. Before we install our upper wing skin, we need to install a piece of scrap. I'm going to push this pushrod housing down. I'm going to slide a piece of scrap into place. It's okay if you get a little bit of a bend. Once we get that in there, I'm going to run a bead of glue where the scrap meets the skin. Give that a couple minutes to cool, then we're going to trim away some of the excess. Once that's cooled down, I'm going to make a cut, leaving about 3/4 of an inch sticking out. I want to be really careful that I don't accidentally cut the servo wire. Once that's done, let's add a couple bevels to the upper wing skin. Let's begin by adding a bevel here. And we're going to add a very small bevel all along this edge. I'm going to test this one more time. My piece of scrap in there, that's going to give me something to push down on. That bevel allows this to close up a little bit better. I'm aligned right here. I think that looks good. I do have a little bit of a step right here, so I'm going to remove a little bit of foam in this area. I want that to close up a little tighter. I just went ahead and beveled that whole edge. I think that looks good. We'll be able to work with that. I've torn off a couple pieces of tape. I'm going to put it here and I'm going to fold it back. Once I get my glue added, this is going to help me keep the skin in place while the glue is cooling down. I'm also going to put a piece of tape right here where the strake meets the leading edge of the lower wing skin. Having these two pieces of tape in place are going to help me to concentrate on the third point of contact, which is going to be right along here. Whenever we're gluing our upper wing skin in place, I'm going to be putting a whole bunch of glue here on this plate. I'm really going to use a lot of glue. I want to make sure I have plenty of time to get the wing into position. I'm also going to put a very heavy bead of glue all the way down here. I'm also going to be adding glue along the spars. If you look under my wingtip, you'll see that I've added some support there too. I'm not going to be putting a lot of pressure out here, but I am going to be putting a little bit. Let's go ahead and add a whole bunch of glue. That's in place. I'm going to quickly line up my upper wing skin here in the back, put my piece of tape across. I'm going to go to my leading edge and wrap my tape around. I'm going to apply pressure here. I have to move my tape real quick. Fortunately, I added a lot of glue, so I'm going to have plenty of time. Make sure that's pressed down and up against the fuselage. And you can see where I'm holding my hand flat. I'm applying a small amount of pressure between my hand and my elbow. I want to make sure that upper wing skin is stuck to the spars. We're going to hold this in place for a full 3 minutes. I want to make sure nothing moves. Once that's had a chance to cool down, we're going to run a heavy bead of glue on top of that piece of scrap we glued in place. Need to wipe away that excess. Got a little sloppy there. Yeah, I want to make sure I got it up here in this corner. I'm going to press down and hold. You'll probably be holding this a while. Make sure and give this a full 2.5 to 3 minutes. It's really difficult to fix if this happens to pop back up. Once that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to use a ruler. I prefer one that's got some cork on the back. I'm going to press down right here at the corner. You can see I've got it angling away just slightly from the fuselage. I'm pressing down because you can see that the upper wing skin is moving just a little. If I just press down, it won't be even. But when I use a ruler, it kind of distributes the pressure a little more evenly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot a bead of glue from here all the way up to about here. In order to shoot a good bead of glue, I want to make sure I don't have any glue coming off the tip, and I'm going to do just a real quick pass. That doesn't look too bad. I'm going to have to go back and do a little bit more. I'll wait till everything cools down. Now I'm going to continue to make my way forward. Again, if you need to go back to add another bead, make sure your glue is fully cooled before doing so. Once that's had a chance to cool down, let's glue the leading edge of our wing. And using my ruler, I'm going to lay it across the leading edge and press down, holding it in place until the glue's had a chance to take a set. Next, you can do the same thing on the strake. You can use tape, but you always risk adding some additional deformation to the edge. If your edges didn't come together here perfectly, it's okay. We're going to be adding a vertical stabilizer, and it begins right here in this area, so this will be completely hidden. This upper wing skin went on really well and everything matched up. Sometimes you might have an edge that's sticking out, whether it's on the top or on the bottom. You can see here on this strake, the upper wing skin actually sticks out a little bit further than the lower one. I could go back and do a little trimming if I wanted to. I'm not going to worry about it on this one. I think it lines up pretty good. Cut away a little bit at the leading edge to make it fit. That's normal. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. We have multiple surfaces that are coming together. Everything that you have done up to this point will affect the way this upper and lower wing skin fits. So it's normal to have to do a little bit of trimming. This one just happened to fit just right. Now that you're done with this side, you can mirror the process and do the other side. To finish out the top of the fuselage, remove these 4 parts from your kit. Let's begin by stacking and gluing the 2 M1 parts together. A little sloppy with the glue gun this morning, that's okay. We'll let that cool for just a minute. I'm going to take and peel paper off of one side. And here at the back, we're going to add a little bit of shape. Let's go ahead and peel the paper off the side with all the scores. I'm going to fold this in half and hold it in place for a minute or two. That'll help it hold its shape when we go to glue it in place. The next thing we need to do is to take our pie-shaped M1 part and we're going to glue it to the skin. Notice that the tip of the skin sticks out just a little bit past the tip of the M1 part. I want to be able to cut a bevel and have the 2 points even with one another. Now we need to add a bevel to both sides. Once we've added our bevel, let's do a quick test fit. Once I'm happy with the position of the test fit, I'll use a razor blade and make a score. And make a score on each of the nacelles. I'm going to pull the part out and run a bead of glue just under each of the scores. Make sure your bead of glue is underneath the scores. When we insert our part, it's going to push all the excess glue to the inside of the aircraft where it'll be hidden. Also add a little bit of glue right here. Here at the very end, I'm going to add a bead of glue from here to here. I'll do that on both sides. If you get some excess, you can always wipe it away with a piece of scrap. Once that's had a chance to cool down, we need to install our final part here on top. And what we're going to do is we need to trim away some material in order for this to fit flush. We don't want a stair step here. I'm going to start by just cutting a bevel. Alright, you can still see that we're too big. I have purposely oversized this part because you can have a little bit of variation when the aircraft goes together. I'm going to start shaving away a little bit on each side until I get the size I need. You can see that I'm holding my razor blade at an angle, so I'm making the cut and creating the bevel at the same time. That doesn't look too bad. I think I'm going to take off just a little bit more, but we are very, very close. You can repeat this process until you get the exact size you need. All right, my fit looks really good. So using a razor blade, I'm going to etch all the way around this final piece. Once I get my score, I'm going to run a bead of glue just inside, and I'm going to run a little bit of glue right here. Get a little final shape, center it up, drop it down, push and hold in place until the glue has a chance to cool. For this next step, you're going to want to locate an old blanket, an old towel, something you can use to protect the top of the aircraft. We're now going to be working on the underside of the aircraft. Before we start closing in the bottom, I want to double check and make sure that all the wires are run up through the middle and into the battery compartment. I want to make sure I've added enough extensions that if I need to do any work with the receiver, that I'll be able to have access. It's really difficult to work on the receiver when it's tucked way up inside here. So make sure you've got plenty of extensions. Also, I've got one of my EDFs hooked up and I'm going to do a quick demo. I need to double check that my EDF is running in the correct direction. So let's test that out. We're good. Now, one other thing that I want to check is over here on the side, we've got our auxiliary inlets or cheater holes, whatever you want to call them. You can see that they're in kind of a closed position. When we run the motor up, we want to make sure that that's going to open up to allow more air in, and then when we turn the motor off, that they close. Let's try that out. All right, that looks really good. Once you make sure all your wires are run through and you've checked the direction of your EDFs, we can start closing things in. Once you've got your electronics checked, remove these 4 pieces from your kit. Let's start by bringing our F4B formers together, gluing them in place. Next, pull the 2 skins labeled C8B and C9B. Let's remove paper from both these pieces. When these pieces come together, they're going to come together like this. I always want to put them like this, but this is going to be the correct orientation. And you can confirm that with the markings. Let's add some shape to C8B. If we look at our symbol mapping, we see that C8B is going to go over the former F4B. So let's line that up. We're going to center that and wrap it around. We'll hold that in place till the glue cools, and you'll notice that we've got 1 layer of foam sticking out all the way around, as we've seen elsewhere. Once that's had a chance to cool down, let's add some shape to C9B. I'm going to add a bevel down each side. You can see I'm not adding much of one, but just a little bit of bevel will help this drop into place. Once that's done, I'm going to glue it onto the former like this. Got my center mark aligned, and I'm going to press and hold while the glue cools. Once that's done, I'm going to set this off to the side just for a minute, and I want to take a look here at the back of the aircraft. I want to make sure that this little block is secured. Whenever I launch the aircraft, I usually have a pointer finger right back here. It's a good place to push the aircraft to get it up in the air. You'll notice I'm trying to keep the glue off to the side. I want to make sure I don't have any up on top. So any excess, you can wipe it away using a piece of scrap. Once that's cooled, we're going to do a test fit. In order to test fit this, we're going to be sliding this part straight back. And you can see I'm keeping the tail kind of high. And I want to pull this back. I'm pushing down here where the skin is meeting the intakes. And if we look up here at the front, I'm going to be pulling it backwards until it drops down. We're going to be gluing it to this former that's right underneath here. So once we get our test fit, we're going to just pull this completely out. To do that, I'm going to lift up here in the front, and I'm going to pull the assembly forward. To begin with, the only place I'm going to be adding glue is here on this former. You can see that I'm adding a very heavy bead of glue. It takes a minute to get this in place. I want to give myself plenty of time to work. As the glue is starting to cool, I'm going to start pushing these edges down until they make contact with the nacelles all the way back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a bead of glue from about here all the way to about here. I'm not going to go all the way down because I want to shoot some glue down there on that M1 block. I want to make sure this lower skin is attached to that. I need to get some glue in there on top of that block. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a blob of glue here on a piece of scrap and run it up inside there. And I'm going to push and hold down until that has a chance to cool. And then we're going to run a bead of glue on either side. Once this is done, this is a really good time to go ahead and hook up your control surfaces to your servo. This is covered in the servo video located in this playlist. While the aircraft is still on its back, let's take a look at the following areas to make sure that you've got an adequate amount of glue added. I always check areas like this, where the horizontal stabilizer meets a nacelle, along here, and right along here. I'm also going to check to make sure I've got beads of glue running all the way down there in the center. Be sure and check both sides. I also will often run an extra bead of glue here along the leading edge of the wing. If you intend to paint your aircraft, this is a really good time to go ahead and scuff it up using steel wool. I'm just using a double-aught steel wool. I can do the entire aircraft in somewhere between 4 to 5 minutes. You don't really have to scrub a whole lot. You just need to scratch the surface and get through the coating just a little bit. Let's go ahead and scuff it up now. Once you've got it scuffed, go ahead and clean it off with either a brush or a soft cloth. If you're going to be belly landing your aircraft, you can run clear tape right along the underside of the nacelle. This will help protect the foam whenever it lands. We're going to be scrubbing the top side of the aircraft next. Now you'll notice that I have not installed my canopy, I've not installed my vertical stabilizers. I generally paint the aircraft without these pieces in place. Especially if you're going to be installing one of our optional decal kits, you will for sure want to leave these items off. Just like on the underside, we're only going to have to spend a couple minutes roughing this up to prepare it for painting. Once that's done, we just need to brush it off, and it's time to start slinging paint. All right, to paint our aircraft, we've already scuffed it up. What we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're going to put a very light coat on the aircraft. We're going to let that fully dry. Once that's dried, we're going to come back and add maybe 3 to 4 more very thin coats. This will give us a very even finish and it won't wrinkle the paper. Once that's done, we're going to flip it over. We'll do the exact same thing on the top. It's about to get real noisy. Let's get started. All right, I want to show you just how light of a layer we put down. If you look, you can see that the brown foam is just starting to turn gray. This first coat, really the lighter you get it, the better. Let that fully dry and then we'll come back and hit it again. All right, if you take a look, you can see we're starting to get some color. You can see a couple patches where we've got a little brown coming through, but 2 or 3 more light layers and we'll be done with the underside. Then we're going to repeat the same process on the top side. One thing you can do between layers is you can dust it off. If you're using primer, you'll get kind of a dusty layer, and it's real easy to get rid of this by wiping it off using a rag. So we're going to try to remove this over the surface of the aircraft. All right, let's add another layer of paint. Once the underside is done, flip it over, do the same thing on the other side. Now that we got the aircraft painted, let's go ahead and install the vertical stabilizers. You'll see that I've already wrapped the vertical stabilizers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my barbecue skewer, I'm going to push it down right here in the corner. I'm going to see approximately where the vertical stabilizer ends and the rudder begins, and I'm going to hold my finger there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 marks 8 inches apart. I've got my 4-inch mark right in the center. I'm going to make a little mark right here and a little mark right here. I want to make sure my vertical stabilizers are running parallel to one another. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to etch a line where my vertical stabilizer is going to be here on the inside. I'm going to take and scratch away some of this paint. It's on there pretty good. Next, I'm going to run a single bead of glue right where the center of the vertical stabilizer meets the nacelle. Now you'll notice that I did not use a whole lot of glue. I want to get both of these tacked in place, and then I want to make sure that the angle is correct before we really add a heavy bead of glue to fully secure them. Once the glue's had a chance to cool, do the same thing on the other side. Once that's had a chance to cool, we're going to measure between the tops of the vertical stabilizers. This will help us get the correct angle. If you look at my ruler, you'll see that I've got exactly 14¼ inches between the tops of the vertical stabilizer. This is exactly what we need. Once we get that measurement, let's run a bead of glue on the inside where the vertical stabilizer meets the nacelle. We'll let that cool down, then we're going to run a bead of glue on the outside edge where the vertical stabilizer meets the nacelle. Once that cools down, you can make the Z-bends in your push rods right where the rudder meets the vertical stabilizer. Go ahead and cut a slot, add your control horn. If you need more information on how to set up the servos, you can check out the servo video located in this playlist. In this section of the video, I'm going to show you how to install the canopy with a stripe in place. Now this stripe is part of one of our livery kits. It's made out of vinyl. And so whenever we install the canopy, we're actually going to have to cut away a portion of the vinyl. I think you'll get a lot better adhesion without having vinyl between the canopy and the fuselage. Make sure that you've got your bevel cut on the underside of your canopy so that we get a nice snug fit. You can see that I'm cutting the bevel in such a way that it'll lay flat on top of the fuselage. What I'm going to do when fitting the canopy is here up front, I want to make sure that I'm even side to side. I can kind of look here at the back to make sure that I'm even. When the canopy fits, from this seam forward, it kind of wraps around the fuselage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a score mark right where the fuselage makes contact with our black stripe. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch the canopy together. So instead of wrapping around like it would be down here, it's more sitting up on top of the fuselage. What I want to do is I want to make sure that I've got an even amount of black on both sides. Looks like I've got about a ½ inch on either side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to score just like I did at the front of the canopy. I'm just going to do one side at a time. As I'm doing this, I'm making sure that the back here is staying perfectly centered. I want to make sure it doesn't shift off to one side or the other. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I want to make sure that I've got the same amount of black on either side. All right, once I've got that done, using my razor blade, I'm going to cut all the way through my vinyl, and we're going to peel away the center. I'm going to move really slowly when removing the vinyl, just in case I don't have it cut all the way through. Once I've got the center removed, I'm going to reposition the canopy, and we can start adding some glue. When adding glue, I'm going to get as close to the vinyl as I can without actually getting into the vinyl. You can see I've got a pretty healthy bead of glue. I want to make sure I have plenty of time to work because we've got a lot of surface area here. When you go to glue the canopy in place, there's a real good chance portions of it are not going to stick. That's no problem. We'll get to those in just a minute. You can see that my canopy here at the back didn't stick real well. In order to get that to stick in place, I'm going to run a piece of tape right along the edge where it did not get glued. Make sure I'm following the edge exactly. Run a second piece of tape. I'm going to curve it around a little bit right here. And go and shoot a little bit of glue up underneath there. And press down, and I'm going to peel my tape away. That ought to take the excess glue with it. See that some of my paint came up. That's no big deal. We can always touch that up later. Most likely it's going to be hidden underneath the canopy decal anyway. Go ahead and go around the rest of your canopy and close up any areas where the glue didn't stick. So as you can see here, I had one side that just didn't stick at all. And that actually worked really well because you're going to have instances where this happens. So what I did, I just ran one piece of tape. The canopy is popped up enough that I can get the nose of my glue gun in there. And I don't think I'm going to need to add any tape on the canopy. I'm going to shoot a bead of glue just inside that vinyl. And I'm going to squeeze that shut and we'll pull the tape away. Hopefully it'll stick a little better this time. Once your canopy is glued in place, go ahead and add the canopy decals. I always like to start at the back and work my way forward. If you ended up with an optional livery kit, placement of the remaining decals will be covered on a PDF located on the Flite Test website.